episodes on PBS Kids or watch anytime you want at pbskids.org.
Wild Kratts is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Find out more about cool animals and collect your own Wild Kratts creature powers. Go to the Wild Kratts website at pbskids.org. We'll see you there!
PBS Kids.
From KQED Public Radio, this is the California Report.
Voila.
now. Maybe we'll do it that way. So we'll, are there any city council comments tonight? Or announcements? Any city treasurer?
Yes, there is the car show this weekend, just in case no one's seen the 450 signs around the village.
And it is from
All day.
9 to 5
Right.
Saturday and 9 to 2 Sunday. That will be a lot of fun. And the Twilight concerts start next Wednesday night on June 12th.
That is correct. Let the games begin.
And Carolyn Swift is speaking, our historian Carolyn Swift is speaking at the Chamber lunch next Tuesday at the Shadowbrook, if anyone would like to hear one of her very interesting talks. And we have a council meeting next week on the 13th to talk about the general plan work plan. Any other council announcements? I said the general plan work plan next week for the council meeting?
Yes, we'll be taking a look at the overall general plan work plan. Our new community development director will be summarizing sort of how he would be recommending moving forward to get the project done.
Great. Any staff announcements or comments? Any city treasurer staff comments? Then we'll move right into the continued budget study session.
Madam Mayor, we have a presentation for you this evening summarizing some of the results from the community group subcommittee. In addition, we have a number of follow-up items where council requested some additional information in previous budget sessions. So we're going to rejigger the format, the order in which we have these slides. So we'll kick it off with our first slide, and we'll come back to the community groups to talk a little bit about the capital outlay components of this year's budget. You'll recall we had some changes in purchasing policy wherein we would identify specific equipment purchases in the budget and then wouldn't require further council review of those purchases. So what we have here for you this evening is a summary of the capital outlay that is included in the program budget for next year. I guess Tori can make a presentation of those items, or Steve, your call.
So we have some vehicles we're purchasing, a marked patrol car, a PD motorcycle for their traffic enforcement. New to our fleet would be a lift truck or a bucket truck. We need to do various chores around here to help us trimming trees, putting lights up and things like that, all important Christmas lights. We've budgeted $41,000 for that. We anticipate coming in hopefully around $30,000, but budget a little more just in case the one we like is closer to that budget range. And then finally one more replacement truck in Public Works. And then this year we are on our 7th year with our current street sweeper. And typically we every 5 years try and replace those. So we'll be issuing a RFP for a new street sweeper. We anticipate buying that. We typically do it with a lease to purchase. It's about $35,000 a year over 5 years to purchase those. So that will be coming to the council for approval of the RFP as we go out, and then the leasing documents as we get there. But that's the street sweeper item on there.
So effectively, with the approval of this budget, everything in the upper box would be basically approved for purchase. The reason the motorcycle isn't checked, the box isn't checked, is because it falls within the purchasing authority of staff. So it doesn't require council approval.
Dennis, put your microphone down, too. Thanks.
How much is the existing Harley Davidson that we're replacing worth?
I'll let the chief talk about that a little bit. He's done a great job of marketing them for sale, and I know we have some potential buyers for them out there.
I'm sure there are.
And in fact, the chief has a slide, I believe it's next, in relation to his the motorcycles.
I might as well
As
go
if
into
on
it.
cue, Councilmember Norton.
So we have two 2007 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and we usually replace every 4 or 5 years. We've had this, both of the bikes going on over 6 years now, and staff has started to look at other options that would be a little bit more conducive to the topography of the city of Capitola, and they've actually demoed several different bikes. And one that Honda has come up with that is starting to hit the market is a smaller size bike, obviously, and the price is a lot more conducive to our range, as you can see. And the size of the bike, it's actually almost half the weight. And the importance of that is if the bike falls on you or you need to move it, it's easier to get it off, obviously. 407 pounds or 72 pounds compared to 805. The width of it is much narrower, and you can see the purpose of that is during the summertime with the traffic, we can actually get through traffic a lot easier without having to sideswipe a vehicle. The gas mileage is much better, as you can see, and also the decibels or the sound of the bike is a lot less. At an idle speed, it's basically 71, and driving at about 2,000 RPMs, it's almost about 40% less. And so this is the bike that we'd like to move to. And so we've got the 2 Harley-Davidsons, and we've actually put those up for sale. And based on the low value of them, they've got upwards of 20 to 25,000 miles on them. We've been trying to look for local law enforcement agencies because of the lighting packages are specific to them. So selling them on the market is pretty difficult, because then you're going to have to take all of that stuff off, and then trying to sell it individually is complicated. And so we do have a couple of local agencies that are interested, and we're looking anywhere between $8,500 to $10,000 for each one of them, which will supplement the cost of an additional bike. So we would actually be ahead of the game.
Thank you, Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
Sam.
Yeah, Chief, while you're there, I was on the cost of the marked vehicle, $38,000. Does that include the expense to fit it and get it ready for service?
Yes, we actually do that in-house typically. Last year we went outside and had an agency up in Sacramento do that. It's going to be an interesting test because the vehicle that we've used in the past, the Crown Vic, is no longer the state chosen marked vehicle, and so there are a couple of different cars that are out there. So we're going to wait a little while to see kind of how other agencies go about their purchases for their marked vehicles, which vehicle they choose, trying to get an idea what some of the problems might be with it, if any, and then go from there. Now, the last time we purchased a marked vehicle, that was the same price that we got, and we purchased one out of Sacramento.
Okay. Well, I would just you know, I've been following the city of Watsonville as well, purchasing a new vehicle, but their budget for it is almost double that. So.
Yeah, so we're looking at one car, and I think we can, in some of the conferences that I've talked to with other agencies, it all depends on which one they select, the state bid, when that comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on capital outlay?
We do have one other additional capital outlay item to present.
And this particular capital outlay item was not included in the fiscal year 13-14 budget. However, as we were looking at renewal of our ADP contract, which expires in September of next year, and also in conjunction with all the new legislation and reporting requirements that come out of the Affordable Health Care Act and responses to public records request, we decided to revisit the payroll human resources software option. And currently we're receiving an offer from the New World Software Company where we can purchase software for $80,000 over a 2-year period, which was originally offered in 2010 at $111,000. What this will do is it is estimated that it will save us $19,000 annually. The $25,000 that we typically budget for ADP services would be replaced with a $6,000 annual software cost. What we currently use now in both HR and payroll is a lot of our information is handled on spreadsheets. And what this would also allow us to do is to merge both functions into a single database. It would allow us better position budgeting because right now we're still doing position budgeting on spreadsheets. It would give us the opportunity to get better numbers, and it would also provide for integration into the general ledger. Right now we get a report and some of the information we have to manually input. We have to manually input information into the PERS public retirement system. This will also allow us to export a file and import it into PERS. We do not see any additional staffing time that would be required for this. Right now, our existing payroll clerk processes the payroll. The departments enter it. She does all the review and processing. ADP handles the issuance of our checks and W-2s. The additional requirements of staff would be some quarterly compliance reports, which are all generated from the system, as well as a year-end W-2s. So we see that the benefits received, where she may not have to be doing that additional entry every pay period with PERS, where we won't have issues with journal entry exports, where we can have better tracking of our positions when they're being coded to grants and other functions, that this seems like a good opportunity to look at this. What it would look like over 2 years is in the next fiscal year we would be required to pay an additional $41,000, and in the fiscal year 14-15 it would be required to have another $21,000 contribution. We would stop using ADP in fiscal year 14-15. We should be fully implemented at that point. And moving forward in future years' budgets, it would result in savings of approximately $19,000. And I don't know if our Administrative Services Director would like to add some additional comments?
So keep in mind that this is basically appropriating existing funds from the Information Technology Fund. So this is no new appropriation into the fund beyond what you've seen in your proposed budget. It's simply a capital outlay from that existing fund. We see it as a real good strategic advantage in the long term for the city to do this in-house with the long-term savings. There is the upfront cost out of the IT fund of $40,000 this year, and it's a net. That's a net in fiscal year 14-15, because we'd be subtracting the $19,000 in ADP costs in that year. Okay. So the next thing we were going to look at was Councilmember Termini asked a little bit when we presented these multi-year sort of chart of where we were looking as a city, looking out ahead into expiring revenues, expiring debt, various changes that we knew about that were going to be coming up over the next 5 years. And you know, the one point before I turn it over to our finance director, I think keep in mind that just because in year 17-18 we may be showing a surplus or we may be showing a deficit in 16-17, by and large the vicissitudes of the city's revenue stream tend to vary in expenditures more significantly than this over this time period. So I think the best way to think about this is looking out ahead. Do we see that we'll be facing headwinds or tailwinds in coming years? Because overall there will be other changes that may or may not be as big or bigger than this potentially, but looking ahead, where are we going to potentially have issues and where are we potentially not going to be having as many issues? So I'll turn it over to the finance director.
And I think our city manager is pretty much provided an excellent overview of the milestones. And then moving on to the next slide is what are some options of how we could potentially weather the deficit period. We know that a large part of the deficit is as a result of the loss of the administrative allowance from the RDA, or the pending loss. While we put it in the budget in the projections to go away in fiscal year 15-16, there could be the chance that it could go away as early as actually next year. And so to assist with that, we thought about an option of creating a stabilization fund. This fund would be different from our reserves because it would just be set aside particularly to help us get through this period. The funds would be designated just for this purpose, and if they weren't used, then we can go ahead and apply them back to wherever we may need. So some of the sources that we've looked at is $500,000 in insurance proceeds that are currently programmed for debt reduction, and also reducing the CIP contribution in the current year. We could continue to say let's watch it as we go along, but the option of setting aside a stabilization fund would be one method that we could use to try to plan for this potential shortfall.
So this slide was developed in response to Councilmember Termini when you asked about could we pre-fund the reserves more a little bit to reduce reserve payments in those particular years. We think the stabilization fund would be probably a more direct way to approach it. Our recommendation is still alternative 2. We still think that it's probably at this point better to monitor the situation, keep a close eye on revenues and expenditures over these coming years, understanding that we're going to have a few challenges coming up here. I'm not sure necessarily that I would recommend cutting the CIP in the current year because in future year, because the alternative is in future years we might have to cut the CIP in order to make it through this cash flow period. So I'm not exactly sure why we would take the drastic step today to avoid taking a drastic step in the future if it's basically the same. It would be basically the same step. There's not really any advantage to pre-funding it. Certainly, it's one way to proceed. However, our recommendation does remain that the $500,000 from the insurance settlement proceeds would be best used for debt reduction, that we monitor the situation and we keep a close eye on it and see where we stand in future budgets.
I'm sorry, I obviously didn't make myself clear last time. Reducing the CIP budget, the CIP budget is the red-headed stepchild of the budget all the time. We're short of money, we stop paving streets. Can't do that. 500 insurance money, I think option 2 is the best. But my question was, in the next fiscal year, 14-15, how much do we have to put into reserves to, again, reduce the end point by another year? Would an additional $350 next year pull us back in so that in 15 we'd have a fully funded reserve? We put in $350 or $300 this year, and it reduced by almost 1 year our goal. Follow me?
Yes, and I believe that would be close to. I believe if we wanted to pre-fund it right now.
No. I'm sorry. In 14-15.
In 14-15.
Next year, when we do the next budget, what should we be looking at as an amount to put into reserves to again reduce it by a year? I'm trying to bring the horizon of the reserve completion closer to us.
After this year, we're going to be at about $2 million. Our target is $3 million. So next year's budget, we have programmed, and I'm speaking in broad brush city manager terms rather than finance director precision, we'd be programming about $500,000 more going next year. So to get us to a fully funded and cut off that last year of contribution, it would be a $1 million contribution approximately in next year's budget.
Which is $500,000 more than we would program.
Than we've programmed.
That's all I wanted to know.
But we also talked about doing this over a number of years. I don't share your feeling. I don't mind doing it over a number of years.
Neither do I.
We built it up over a number of years last time. It went away quickly, and I don't mind building it up again over a few years.
I'm good with that as well, but just when I see those 2 scary years in the chart, I go, oh, wait, before we get to those scary years, maybe we should have a fully funded reserve. But that remains to be seen. I like your suggestion of waiting because we do have up years, and we seem to be on an upward trend. So I'm not ready to make any motions or recommendations or anything.
Okay.
And I will open this up to the public after we've had a little more presentation and discussion. Steve.
So one last review of our 13-14 capital improvement program. This is the entire program. Last session we just talked about adding projects to this. So I'll read down the list really quickly here. We have the Clare Street Traffic Calming Project, the 38th Avenue
Excuse me, Steve,
overlay.
is this in order of priority?
No. These are all funded at this point, so we will be working on them all and getting them out as quickly as we can. They'll each have their own schedule.
I have a question about the overlay. When we asked the sanitation district what kind of overlay they were going to put on Park Avenue, they said a new type of overlay. Go to Aptos Village and look at it. It's a thicker overlay, and I did look at it, and it did look better. Can we go to those? Can we do some of those rather than?
They're doing a slurry seal, and I'll find out what they're doing because they're only conditioned to do a slurry seal on Park Avenue at this point. 38th Avenue is a new asphalt, so we can look into that too.
Because I think we just should do is the best job we can so it'll last a little longer maybe, or if there's anything new and different out there other than, because we did a slurry seal on Claire's not that long ago. It didn't seem like it. It looks horrible now. I don't know, maybe it was longer than I'm remembering.
Yeah, it hasn't been since I've been here that we've
How
done
many
a
years
slurry
is
on
that?
Claire's, 11 years.
Oh. I have a short memory.
God bless.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Monterey Avenue and Fanmar paving, that's actually a bank toward a future project. I think Monterey Avenue comes up in a couple of years and Fanmar soon after that. But we did put $50,000 in. We've completed about 75% of the design work with that money, and so that's still an allocation that's in there. Utility undergrounding, I'm still working with PG&E to try and figure out what we can do with the money we have. Go ahead.
Doesn't our Rule 32 money cover all of that, or do we, why would it cost
No,
us
it does
anything?
not cover the original scope of work, and that's
Really?
why we keep running into them not working on it until the Rule 32A or 28, whatever it is, can cover the entire project. They won't work on it. Also, I've talked to them what's reduced the scope of the project, and they're trying to get back to me with some reduced scopes that we can then decide on.
Okay.
Lower Pack Cove parking lot, you know about Bay Avenue streetscape and paving, so that's repaving in front between Union Bank and Capitol Produce, and then adding some streetscape islands on the shoulder of the road up toward Monterey Avenue. Park Avenue sidewalk, we've talked about. Stockton Avenue pedestrian crossing, these are the projects we added last week, were the Stockton Avenue pedestrian improvements, Hill Street pedestrian improvements, Rispin Park improvements, that's only partially funding the total project there, and then Monterey Park Historic Depot improvements. And again, that's kind of a holder for now until we decide what we can do with Metro and the railroad company. So the total allocation is $3,337,000 that we will have in our CIP fund. You know, a couple of those are carried over from previous years, so it's not all new money. But that's my goal for next year, is to work on all these projects.
Busy guy.
Is there any questions?
Any questions about these projects? Dennis?
You know, I think all these projects are important, but when I look at needs in the community, there's one that's missing from here that we have to address as a community, and that is the skateboard park. And I know there's discussion around right now about how to deal with that. And so is the Rispin really important to allocate $100,000 to right now? It couldn't be put off for a year?
The problem is if we keep putting it off, it's going to take longer to open it up. And
But weigh that against the skateboard park. Is that Rispin more important than the skateboard park?
I think it is. We haven't found a location for a skateboard park. And we haven't come up, we have some funds, but we haven't come up with the rest of the funds. So, I mean, it's a great project, but it hasn't really ready to move forward.
You know, I could ask a question? If we, you know, in a near-term future meeting, could earmark a spot. I know we've always talked about the skateboard people raising their own money. If we could land on a location that's palatable to the community, and for minimal amount, put a couple of porta potties in or whatever, if that's what it requires, then maybe portion of the Rispin money, you know, $20,000 or whatever, could do some rough improvement to a rural park kind of a thing. I think that's always an option, but I think it's something I have to agree that we have to address.
Of all the projects on there, the Rispin is, you know, probably, well, the Rispin and the Monterey Depot Historic Park, whatever we're calling that thing, those are the two that are the least defined. You know, as we've discussed previously, the Rispin property is still in a bit of a phantom toll booth state, so the $100,000 staff is recommending for that project really kind of as a placeholder, as the mayor pointed out, to kind of get us going in that direction. There's potential improvements that could be done, but there are, as Councilmember Norton, Councilmember Fermini have pointed out, other potential uses for it, which could always be programmed either tonight, could be simply put as a placeholder, or that could be reprogrammed down the road.
I like the park improvement scope, but broader, so that, you know, and Rispin should be up on the list, you know, and high on the list. But I think having a little sinking fund like that is good.
I mean, certainly if something else comes up, you know, we can spend that money for it. It's not locked in necessarily.
Well, I'm going to get back to my statement, and I think, you know, since I've sat on this council, I can't tell you how many times that we promised kids out there that they're going to get a skateboard park. and many of us here at this council chambers voted for it a couple times in favor of doing it, and we still to this day have not gotten moved forward on this. And we've gone through the Rispin property as putting it there. We've gone through Jade Street Park as putting it there. We've gone through Monterey Park now, and it appears that it's not going to go there. They deserve, just like any other member of the community, to have a recreational opportunity within our community. And so if I'm weighing opportunities or community improvements that we're going to put our money into, I think we have a long unmet obligation to the kids of this town to produce that. It is the highest use recreational use of any recreation for kids in that age group. And we need to perform, and I think we need to perform this year.
Find us a good location.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have one.
Sam.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I hadn't heard that the skateboard park in Monterey Park was no longer going to, be built or happen. And so I would certainly support if, in fact, we are now looking at moving away from Monterey Park, at looking at an alternative location. But my understanding is that, the council had approved that location and a particular project and design, and had set upon the skateboard folks to go and now raise the money to build that park. And so if that is a dead project, yeah, then maybe that should come back, and we should reconsider that and look at it possibly another location. And I also have a question about the Rispin and the timeline that in 13-14, will we have finality on the cloud of ownership on the Rispin?
I don't think that we will have finality on the cloud or the Rispin. The first phase in the state controller's audit is going to take place this summer, but I understand that there's a phase 2 that's going to come further down the road, probably closer to the end of the fiscal year.
Well, I think we should flag that and just realize that, we should not put any money into the Rispin until we absolutely know that, the cloud on the title, or that we actually have ownership of that property, and we'll have it for the long term. So I mean, I'm maybe willing to put a footnote by that one, so that we can have some options and look at the skateboard park at another location.
One suggestion, and I'm echoing Councilmember Termini's, maybe just to label this project as Rispin/park improvements. And then I think, we don't have to have this discussion and decide this tonight, but it provides a little bit more direction to staff about what we're talking about here, and identifying the fact that, yes, we do need to be setting aside money for the Rispin if and when it becomes clearly city property, but in addition, there may be other park improvement type projects for which having a little sinking fund, as Councilmember Termini put it, is a real advantage.
I think we should put the bottom 2 items in that category then. They should fall into the same thing, because we're talking about a park at least another park at the corner of Park Avenue and Monterey. It should fall in that same category.
So we'll combine those bottom 2 projects into more of a general park improvement project, and with a $130,000 budget, and we'll come back to you and have more discussion on exactly how to spend it. Does that sound right?
Ed?
Just a little bit more discussion. Okay. Of these funds that have been distributed, I like the footnote idea, Sam. And Dennis, I like what you're saying also. I mean, I'm committed to the skate park also. The problem is we don't have a place to put it. And we all know, and let's be realistic, is that once we do decide we have a place, we're going to have to get the approval of the residents that that's an acceptable location. And whether or not those funds are still available to actually build the park is a whole different category. But I am all in favor of, the 2 things I'd like to see opened up, or happen, is the skate park and the Rispin. And so putting money into that fund, and the question I want to go back on is, the money we're getting from the flood, how much of that is going into the reserves?
$300,000.
The recommended allocation that came from the Finance Advisory Committee, which at this point staff completely supports and is included at this point in the proposed budget, is $300,000.
And then we've got that pretty much allocated over the next 4 years to fully fund that. Wasn't that the plan that was met? And that was based on putting in 300,000?
There were specific Measure O allocations which would have it fully funded within the 5 years.
Right, and I think the important thing is that you know, I thought that the Measure O allocations were going to completely fund that, and it wasn't necessary to put any more money into the reserves. And when you talk about the slide that was up earlier, the $500,000 insurance, I would feel more comfortable putting money into this fund. We call it Rispin Skate Park, and that way we don't have to. The Measure O money would completely fund. So we don't have to take money out of that, and there's no, you know, transparent, you know, semblance that we're taking money out of reserves. That Measure O completely does that, and we use this money from the flood to put into this fund that we don't know, because we don't know if we have the Rispin, and we don't know if we have a suitable lot for the skate park. We know that we believe in it and we want to make it happen. But should all of a sudden something come up and present itself and we have this, then we're going to have to find this money. And if we have it in this, whatever you want to call it, park fund, you know, Rispin fund, if we don't know if the Rispin's ours. If it becomes ours, we can talk about it. But if there's nothing in there and we don't start putting money into that fund and dedicate it, we're back trying to scratch.
And that came from our discussion at the last meeting, that that the Rispin, in order to get it fully open, was 500,000, $1 million, 500,000?
Easily.
550 is our current estimate. That's to complete all the park improvements. To get it open is about 200,000.
I was thinking it was just a couple $100,000. And when we saw that higher figure, I said we should start putting money aside every year so that we'll be that much closer to finishing it. Finally, I think the public's sick of it just sitting there.
Well, like I said, I think we feel the pressure of the Rispin and the skate park. But right now, all I see is there's nothing with the skate park, and there's 100,000 in the Rispin. So should either one of those present themselves, we are not setting anything aside from, you know, what I consider the one-time flood refund, which is to be meant for, you know, special acquisitions, which the skate park would definitely qualify.
Well, 350,000 of that went to CIP last week as a recommendation of the Finance Advisory Committee. So, you know, there were other projects ahead of it too, but that whole 100,000, matter of fact, that 130,000 is actually insurance money.
Okay.
And what that 300,000 did, that's above and beyond what the Measure O funds were going to do. What it did is it brought the horizon a year closer for the completion of the reserves.
Right, and then I wonder about the importance of doing that. You could explain to me that, but I would rather see the money in a place where we could use it and not have to extract the money from the reserves and bring in whatever controversy that is for us taking money out of reserves.
Staff's recommendation is to make sort of the three-part contribution from the reserves. I think that, you know, based on the campaign and the ballot language, we talked about those as the city's sort of nearest term immediate priorities. I guess my suggestion would be that if we did want to establish a park fund and we put $130,000 in it, the nature of all three of the projects we're sort of talking about, a theoretical skate park, a theoretical Rispin park, and a potential park at the corner of Monterey and Park, none of those may or may not come to pass in this next year. And do remember that next year's budget, we have programmed somewhere around $500,000 coming in of Measure O money back into the CIP. So, you know, I guess my suggestion would be, we've identified these priorities. Let's contribute to all three of them. We have a decent little start on this thing, which we can get something done if one of these projects come to fruition this year, and then in next year's budget, as these projects ripen, we can make further allocations.
The Finance Advisory Committee recommended using 30% of the money for the CIP, 26.1% for reserves, and 43.5% for long-term debt. And we had a long discussion about that, a good discussion about that.
I think if we take a close look at this year's list of projects, I'm always impressed with Steve Jesberg. And if Steve actually does all of these projects in the next year, I'm going to buy him a cape. Okay, so I think we've got the money. It's not like we're spending it willy-nilly. We've got some really important, dedicated and projects that we have promised the community. So,
yeah, and Dennis really advocated for doing the Stockton Avenue pedestrian improvements, because that's something we really haven't ever really talked about seriously, and with the two areas where people can cross and near misses and accidents, so forth, that we should take a look at that. Let's real serious look at that.
Yeah, no, I think they're all great. I just would like to make the commitment towards those issues we've talked about, and we know that whenever that opportunity presents itself for that skate park, and it may come down to us acquiring the piece of property and someone else doing that, and they're going to look to us to fund that, and I hope we can deliver. That's all.
The funding has always been by the people promoting the skate park. So, but acquiring the land or earmarking the land has been our responsibility. And let's not forget, let's just not focus on skate park. I mean, we have many community members who like to see a dog park too. So there are things for us to pay attention to park-wise this coming year.
So would the council like to combine those two amounts of money, $230,000, and change the name of it?
Sure.
And to Parks
Fund.
Parks Fund, and leave it open, and it'll be available if and when we need it.
The only clarity I think we would ask is about the last project on there, because it was a specific project which potentially we could get done this year. Is that something that the council would like to see done if we are able to continue to advance it and bring it forward for consideration?
I think the key there is bringing it forward for consideration. All of many of these items we're giving the nod to, but many of them will come back to us before they put the shovels in the ground.
Absolutely. The thing about the park projects in particular, I think that this conversation really points to is that they're not easy. If they're easy, probably would have been done over the last 20 years. So to a large degree, understanding where our staff resources should be put is an important point of the budget. So I can understand, Steve is, as Councilmember Termini pointed out, a one-person operation at this point, and this is an ambitious CIP, and so understanding if it's a project worth working on, it's something you'd like to see, we can deliver it. If we're saying, yeah, let's focus kind of more on the wristband and more on skate park stuff at this point, that's obviously where we can put our efforts.
I think since the Monterey Park is something that's near and dear to me, I'm willing just to leave that combined, because I think we've got, things with the RTC to deal with, and just whether that's even going to happen.
And the RTC could put the kibosh on it pretty quick.
Exactly. So
Metro has been enthusiastic about it, but the RTC, although we have a person on the inside there, may or may not, they're dealing with a lot of issues.
But if we're paying for it, why would they object, I wonder?
It would also take
they're just
their
stingy
operator's approval, and who knows.
They're just stingy with the easement right now, and that was one of the policies they talked about.
For good reason, because they're creating a long-term plan for the whole corridor, so they're trying to determine maybe the bus stop idea it transcends into a railroad stop at some time too. There's a lot of different ideas. I'm sure that if we put something in front of them, we would probably be able to work it out. But
I think I'm comfortable with just combining the two for now, and we've had the discussion about where we'd like to see it go, and as those projects present themselves, at least we've got something started there.
I have a question, Steve. Why do we separate the projects that we're funding through the insurance rebate money from these projects? In other words, why is it separated?
It's not.
It's not there in here.
All of them are on this list?
Yeah. Yes.
We added the projects,
Okay.
The last 4 projects on this list are the projects we added last week from the insurance money.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd really like to see would be a line for if we wanted to take a little more money from reserves and put it in streets, and have it delineated as street/ADA, and see if there aren't some relatively inexpensive projects that we can do to increase ADA compliance in the community. Maybe on Capitola Road, where there's a telephone pole right in the middle of the sidewalk, on a narrow sidewalk, maybe we could do a bulb out there. Now that would, tie into the bike lane or something, and maybe that wouldn't be a good idea. But if there are some simple projects like that, we can look around town, and we all know where there are some places with really poor ADA access, and we could do something minor there to fix it. We could do that.
There is, in the contract services portion of the budget under facilities, $10,000 for ADA improvements, and we use that for new ADA ramps at 312
Well, I'd like to have that
Capitola.
be more, I guess.
So we could
have it be a
increase
higher
that.
figure.
I don't think it necessarily needs to be in capital improvement program, but it could be
Well, then I
in
think
that
that
line
should be
item.
higher. That $10,000 is nothing for ADA.
I think every council member should come to the next meeting with their worst ADA spot in the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I say that because I have one already. So.
Start a list.
I do too.
Yeah, I mean, we have a commitment to it, but then we don't put very much money behind it. It doesn't seem like to fix some of these weird spots that we have in town. So, okay, anything else on this?
Got one more?
Maybe if I could just add one final thing. If we're going to have a kind of a generic fund, maybe designated for parks or Rispin/parks, maybe, and I'm sure staff is maybe already thinking along those lines. If there's possible grant funding that we could get, state grants, federal grants, and this funds could be used to leverage that, I mean, that should maybe also be a guiding principle. How can we maximize this, relatively small amount of money to maybe draw down additional money? And then that kind of also directs the particular project that we would be doing at the time. So, I mean, just giving them the flexibility to look at this set of funds in that manner.
I think the Rispin is a natural for that once we get title figured out.
Yes.
But in order to get grants, we really need a plan, so that would be the seed money to go after for that.
And that's the same thing we've been thinking about the Little Depot Park. We've been in conversations with Metro about them financing the shelter, or at least the base cost of the shelter, if you will. So I think that's a good principle for us to use with these funds, because they are limited.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. I have one more slide. Our favorite topic, village sidewalk cleaning and garbage removal.
Hooray.
So I kind of put together a list of things we're working on, things we can work on in the future regarding this. So the current Public Works budget, it's not an itemized item, but we do have funding for 2 sidewalk cleanings that we do in the village. We can do the entire village. I think we're doing one next week, and we'll be doing one somewhere in the second third of the summer. We recently, the city manager and I and the maintenance supervisor met with the BIA and started a conversation that they were very receptive to about developing a new cleaning schedule and funding program with them, a partnership. And their point was, we said we need to do it more often and we need help paying for it. And they said, well, we really don't need to do every sidewalk more often. We need to better identify which sidewalks need it and how often they need it. So we agreed to work with them on that. And I'll be talking with them and trying to get that worked out in the next few months. We just received today a new pressure washer that was in the budget for this year. So we will be increasing our efforts of doing spot cleaning. As a bad area develops, we'll be able to get in there with our own crews and address it. We'll also use it for graffiti abatement. And that's going to be a big one, because I think that's been our biggest problem is we've had, one of the garbage cans leaks, and there's this ugly spot, and we had no way to clean it before. And so it waited until we did another pressure washing. So now we'll be able to get in there and do that and have a commitment from the crews to do that. So the city manager has come up with a potential plan to develop an annual business fee for takeout establishments to augment the budget for cleaning in the area. That's something I think we'll be bringing to the council. I don't know if we necessarily have a time frame yet, but we're looking to try and bring it forward really soon. Right now we're trying to quantify how much money we actually spend doing these items with the Public Works crews. So I would say probably in the next 3 or 4 meetings we'll be bringing that to the council to consider. When it goes into place and all that will need to be worked out, but that's another option to augment our funding out there. Just regarding garbage, I know that's been a big issue the last couple of weeks. Hope Services will be beginning their work along same time Junior Guard starts on June 17th, and their full focus is on garbage removal. They only work during the week. Wish we could get them on working on weekends, but for right now, that's a big benefit and a big help to the village and to the Public Works crews. Is they cover the beach, they cover the Esplanade, and the rest of the village. So that'll be coming. They're starting June 17th. We'll be going through just before the Art and Wine Festival. And we're continually trying to address the garbage issues out there. We've recently purchased several new cans, had them out, I think, the weekend before last. We've adjusted our routes on when we go in and which cans we empty before we leave. The last 2 weekends have been better. I know the 3 weekends ago it was pretty bad. So we are working on it. We're very aware of the issues. Our maintenance supervisor has taken to driving through the village now at 9 o'clock at night on Saturday to see where we are so he can adjust and modify. So we'll continue that for the next few weeks to try and make sure we're on top of it. One thing we're running into is people searching through the cans and removing the top, which then just leaves the birds to tear it apart. So that's one problem we're facing. And the last item here deals with it is that a lot of the village merchants like to use our garbage cans for their business garbage. So the PD is working with them to try and address that and make sure they realize that they can't be using ours. So they're putting them out late at night, and it's sitting on the street all night, and that's not acceptable. So we're working with them. PD's had pretty good response. We didn't have any problems this last weekend with that. So that's kind of where we're going right now. If you have any comments or suggestions, I'd be happy to hear them.
Mike?
Did we reduce Hope Services last year?
No.
Or am I losing track of time as well?
We've talked about them, seemed like every budget year, but I think for the last 2 years they've been pretty stable, and they're fully funded for the summer at this
Great.
point.
Okay.
Dennis?
Steve, Rudy, Jamie, thank you very much for getting on top of this. I think it's important. The face of our community is right down there on that beach, and so I really appreciate you tackling this.
Absolutely.
I would add another one or two sidewalk cleanings to your budget. And so do once a month. I mean, I think the spot idea is great, and maybe that'll take care of it. But I just would really like the village to look as clean as possible, and to have those sidewalks fully cleaned once a month would be wonderful.
So that would be, it's about $3,000 a cleaning, so that would be adding another $6,000 to our budget.
That might be more than what the BIA is thinking that they think people can contribute to, but that might be a place to look to also with that. And then the question is, what are the takeout restaurants? Because you always take your leftover stuff with you that you haven't finished. So is that takeout? No, it's when you call up and get it to take it out.
Yeah, and that's part of the discussion we're having is what businesses do we assess the fee to, and which ones do we not? And that's part of our analysis.
Well, if it's obvious if you don't have seating in your restaurant, you're taking it out somewhere.
Chances are.
Chances are.
Madam Mayor, so in our conversations with the BIA, the way we've portrayed it is if that they can bring more money to the table, we'll bring more money to the table. So there is, Steve has not anticipated events funding, and so I think that we certainly would support getting more cleaning out there. We'd like to see a partnership with the BIA to do that. And then I think secondarily, if we are able to establish a takeout fee on the restaurants that have the takeout services, and defining that is going to be a bit of a challenge, I think that money would get plowed right back into an increased cleaning cycle. So
yeah.
we share your concern, and we're really trying to find a way to get that done.
I think we need to look at increasing the cleaning of the bathrooms, too.
Okay.
One you don't have on this list, Steve, is that Save Our Shores does come down once a month now as a community volunteer program once a month at Capitola Beach, and so you can add that to your list.
Okay.
Okay.
Sam, did you have
We
a
are
question
funding.
or comment?
Well, just in terms of the frequency of the cleaning, it seems to me that that just on the Esplanade is where it gets the worst. And maybe if we could just focus on more cleaning there instead of, and maybe even more sparse and less cleaning through the other parts of the village.
I think that was the BIA's
Right.
take on that too.
Yeah,
So that's why we
So-
kind of want to come up with a cleaning schedule and then figure out what it would cost and how to share the cost with the BIA at that point.
Okay, good.
Any other comments or questions on this? Thank you very much. Very exciting.
So, Madam Mayor, at this point, I want to talk a little bit about our budget process. The next thing that we have available for you to talk about tonight is sort of a summary of the community group subcommittee that met and recommendations from that subcommittee and allocation of funds for the community groups. I know that Councilmember Story will have to recuse himself or will be recusing himself from that discussion. Our plan as staff was to bring the budget resolutions for final budget adoption to the next council meeting. So we were hoping to see consensus among the council members about the overall budget and get that direction tonight so we could prepare the budget resolutions for our next meeting. We do have more budget hearings scheduled, so if you would like, we can certainly hold those other meetings if there's other points for discussion. So you may want to consider at this point checking in to see whether or not you think that you've given us complete direction or if there's other items that you would like to see in those budget resolutions and get clarity about whether or not you're ready to see those resolutions come to the next meeting, at which point then we could turn back to the community groups and wrap that up as our final item.
there topics that council members would like to talk about?
You know, I think that, true, it's a good year as far as income, but I think generally we have hit on all the high points. We have paid attention to community needs. We have paid attention to our 3 primary objectives. And I think that, give or take $1,000 here, $1,000 there, this $13 million budget, in my mind, is good and I would have, at this stage, the ability to make a motion to approve it so you could bring the resolution back.
I want to have a public hearing first.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the, just have a little review of the Housing Trust Fund and what we have planned for that, or that's just a placeholder.
So our community development directors at our planning commission meeting this evening. So you will note that the Housing Trust Fund has a balance, I think, of $71,000 that's unprogrammed in this year's budget. Actually, it's a higher balance, a revenue of $71,000. I don't recall the balance offhand.
It was 170, something like that.
The Housing Trust Fund, I'm going to give as quick as focused a response as I can, but it's a complicated issue overall. You'll recall that the Housing Trust Fund does support the payments on the Pacific Cove bond that were relocation payments for low-income residents. So a portion of the bond payments does come out of the Housing Trust Fund. That being said, we can expect additional revenue over time, and I don't think anyone's expectation is the Housing Trust Fund will continue to make those debt payments. It was really kind of a bridge strategy, if you will. Previously, we had several housing programs that were funded out of our low-mod housing fund with the redevelopment agencies. They included our first-time homebuyer program, our emergency housing assistance, our security deposit program, and the rehab program. You will recall that David Foster would come to you usually in July or early August with contracts with the different affordable housing providers, CAB and Housing Authority, to allocate those funds. So what we have planned to do tonight, and I gave you a little bit of a teaser, is we're not planning on allocating those, but I have asked the community development director to provide a little bit of history about those different programs, explaining how the revenue stream for those programs is gone at this point, and what options we might have to fund either one or a limited version of some of them in this coming year's budget using that Housing Trust Fund. So we don't have a plan at this point to propose allocating that, but we do plan on coming back in the next couple of meetings with some options. And I know Councilmember Story has asked about the first-time homebuyer program, as well as Councilmember Norton asking about how the inclusionary program is working.
Thank you.
So that was a long-winded answer. I apologize.
That's okay.
It's something that we've been tussling with internally, how best to deal with.
Right. Dennis.
We still have an inclusionary housing program that has potential of having a revenue source. Is that go into that fund also? Is that?
Yes. The revenue sources that come into this fund are from the inclusionary fees. In addition, we have our successor agency's Housing Trust Fund that effectively is the result of the repayment of old redevelopment agency loans. So you may recall that we made a first-time homebuyer loan several years ago. The couple prepaid it. We received the proceeds recently, and so those are sort of two potential sources if we wanted to look at some of those historic programs that we used to fund and whether we want to put or allocate funding to them in this next fiscal year.
I know it's tough to anticipate what kind of revenue that we would have from that program because we don't really have any on the horizon, but there are places within the city that have potential of going to a higher density or a multi-family type of dwellings where you could bring in some revenue to the city. So the fund actually should stay in place, it seems, and being able to accumulate. And then at that time, if we feel we have a project there or some need for it, we can actually allocate it at that time by bringing it back to council.
Yeah, certainly. I'm sort of stealing my own thunder here, but basically the two options we were going to present was sort of that strategy that we would continue to accumulate funds in these affordable housing accounts and then look for another partnership project potentially with a nonprofit, and another alternative, and these options could be considered in conjunction, would be to look at the emergency housing assistance, look at the rehab, look at some of those other programs and consider allocating some funding to them because, you know, CAB still exists, and they do provide services, and the Housing Authority does still administer first-time homebuyer programs and the rehab programs outside of the city. So they are relatively turnkey for us, and they would be an option for us to consider.
This won't cost very much, but I'd like Steve to have someone look at the Capitola signs, say "Welcome to Capitola." I think the one on 41st Avenue has gotten really faded. It wouldn't cost very much to fix that up. And the one on Capitola Road is kind of covered by bushes, I think, or maybe needs a little upgrade. And then the other one is Park Avenue? No.
There's one on Park Avenue, too.
Just take a look at them, and there's just one at least that needs to be redone a little bit. And
we should also, make a note to talk to Caltrans. I know how responsive they are to cities, and it might be noted that the only sign on the freeway that says beach is on Park Avenue. Seems like we'd like to let them know that Bay Avenue will get them there, too.
Yeah. And also, just philosophically, I think that we should pay for our canine officer, that we shouldn't do fundraising. It's one of our officers, and it should be...
You mean the dog?
Yes,
itself?
the canine officer, and the canine, but he's an officer, too. And why should they fundraise for that? Why should they have to pay for it? It's an officer. It's part of our important service in the city, and I know it costs a bit, but I think just philosophically, I just always feel bad when we don't pay for it and they have to pay for it.
Community Safety Foundation loves doing that. As a board member, I have to tell you, it's one of our favorite things to do, to buy dogs for the
Really?
canine. Yeah.
Wouldn't you rather spend your money on something else? I mean, I'm sure there's probably something else you could think of.
Anything we do, you could make an argument that the city can do. We're the fallback.
I know, but it makes us sound kind of cheap that we're not going to pay for the full services of our department, it seems like. So just something to think about. And I mean, if they, I don't know. I mean,
They get pleasure out of that.
Do they?
Yeah.
If they do,
absolutely.
that's fine.
Absolutely.
But I just would like the city to pay for it also, if possible.
We bought tasers one year for all the officers.
The city did.
No, the Community Safety Foundation.
I thought the city did.
We chipped in there and made sure everybody had them, the latest model, and that's kind of a fun thing.
Okay. Dennis.
Back to the sign 70. I think they're over 50 years old, so that's a
No, they're not that old.
SECO requires that they're now historic.
Oh.
No, they're less than 20 years old, I think.
You think so?
Yeah. Yeah. Pam's son did them.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're 50 years old.
So
Beatty does it.
Yeah.
one other point, I realize that this may have been, I may have overlooked this as staff, is that there was a request to increase the funding for the chamber back to the historic levels of $30,000 a year. You'll recall in this budget, I believe they're programmed in at $23,500. So unfortunately, I bundled that slide with the community groups, and so staff brought forward on one of our slides that we can discuss in a minute, an option to reduce down some of the equipment fund contribution that we would be making in this year's budget to restore the chamber back to their historic level. The reduction in the equipment fund would be, if you will, the extra money we were putting in. We have the sort of the allocation of the equipment fund to keep the balance static, but we were looking at putting in a little bit more beyond that amount because we had pulled the money out, sort of depleted the equipment fund, if you will, and put it into reserves. So we'd still be funding the equipment fund at sort of the normal cost, the annual cost, but the amount of refunding, if you will, into the equipment fund would be depleted by that $6,500. So that is another item that we can discuss, and that's obviously not an item for which there's a conflict for Councilmember Story.
Well, let's hear from the public now. Any comments that any of you have on anything that you've heard about so far on the slides and the services and the potential allocations of the dollars in the budget? We'd love to hear from you. Any other suggestions or things around town that you'd like to see done?
Not including community grants. We're not discussing that.
We'll have community grants next. But anything that you've heard of sidewalk cleaning, capital projects, the roads, sidewalks on Park Avenue, those residents had asked for. Good evening.
Hello. Sandy Erickson. I live up on Cabrillo Street, and I think it's great that you got that sidewalk in there. So, you know, I hope it comes about. But I am concerned that that you're allocating up the, quote, windfall that you got from the insurance money. And I'm sorry that I missed the first part of this, but it seems to me, and when you talk about returning historic funding. The people aren't restored to historic earnings, and yet we're already moving forward. And when I hear about let's have another park, which is something else to maintain, and I agree with Councilman Bottorff about maybe, putting some of this money into more into reserves. But I philosophically have a problem with asking the businesses to contribute more to clean the streets and pick up the trash. That, to me, is something that the city ought to do. And as somebody who frequents the village and likes to go, because any place down there will be takeout. Everybody will sell you something to take out and sit on a bench. And there are several places that know I'm a pretty good customer. I think anything that increases the cost of the food or that sort of stuff on them is not something that we should ask them to do. And I think that staffing and everything ought to be reallocated during the summer so that it can be taken care of. I mean, because we have more people there on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and that sort of thing. I want to put in a plug, though, since we remodeled the bathrooms, that is a huge improvement. And the major thing of keeping toilet paper and soap has pretty good. The toilet paper's been doing pretty good. They don't have enough soap dispensers, and they don't have enough paper towel dispensers in there. So, but I think, and again, I would hope that you would not set aside any money with the thought of having a skate park until people decide where it's going to be and what's going to happen, and then have a thorough discussion of it, because that's not near as popular, I don't think, as any of you think that it is. So thanks for the opportunity to say something.
Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. And Steve's noted the paper towel and the soap issue. And
I think that there's a lot to be said for a year when we have a pretty well-funded public works department that we do lack in the weekend attention, mainly because Hope Services is not available, and we've always had this struggle being able to keep things squared away. The fact that we don't always pay as much attention to the ladies' room down at the beach because we're one of the few public works departments that does not have a single female on its staff. I don't know if you realize that or not. So, and it makes it a little more cumbersome, clearing the restroom. So, more weekend cleaning. And just to put a plug in, I think the chamber is really a no-brainer. There's nothing that directly affects the health and well-being of our community as much as the chamber takes a personal interest. And if you look at the events that we have, if you look at the positive things that take place, many of them are because of the chamber. And the last couple of years, having to cut them down by almost a third, it's a small operation. And if it weren't for us and the Art and Wine Festival, there would be no chamber. So I think it's important for all that they do to us to get that particular community group and public, economic engine refunded back to where it belongs, especially in view of the fact that we don't have to give anything to the CVC. We're still netting in a positive.
Ed, do you have any comments on the budget?
I'll agree with Councilman Termini. I think we should refund the $30,000 for the chamber, especially in light of the CVC. And with regard to the Esplanade cleaning, I think we're good with that for right now. I attended a BIA breakfast with Public Works and City Manager, and I think the presentation was made then to try to establish a partnership. So I don't think we should fund that at this point unless that comes up out of the proposal that was made. So I'm pretty much in agreement with the way the budget is right now. Thanks.
Sam?
No, I think I agree with Mike. I think we should either, either pass the resolution or let the staff know that we're in concept prepared to adopt it.
Dennis?
It's sure a lot easier for us and for staff when we have money and for the community. And there are a lot of projects that we've been putting off that are on the list this year that I think we're all really happy to see them come forward in this next year. If we can produce like we're intending to do, I think that's a good thing for everyone in the community. I always have bringing the term reserves up, meaning that I don't remember going through a whole year and not going and tapping them. There's always something that comes up within the city. We're a community that's known for small disasters and large disasters, and that it seems like we could never have enough in that fund. I like the idea that we have a program that we'll retrofit that all our reserves within a very reasonable amount of time, and we're growing it, and we have a large allocation this year into that, and that's a good thing. So I will assure you that staff will come to us this year and ask for some money out of that fund. It just happens. It's just the nature of business. When you create a budget for yourself at home, you certainly can't allocate every dollar to everything you're doing all the way through. It's gonna happen, and we're gonna face it at that time. And so hopefully we put enough away this year that we can cover any emergencies or other needs within the community. State law, federal law changes all the time. That seems to change our costs. There's a number of things that are up in the air right now. What we do with how the state will deal with the RISMN. It seems to me that the successor agency is on its way out, which will relieve not only the little bit of burden we have, but staff from having to deal with that issue. I'll support and I'll second Mike's motion to approve the budget, and I do support the $30,000 for the chamber.
Just under further discussion, if there's an opportunity this year to add landscaping and trees to the corporation yard, I'd really like to do that. We have two, relatively new, successful businesses down at the end, and people are driving down there, and it looks pretty bad. And so we can, by example, maybe plant a bunch of trees there, and at some point have a neighborhood meeting with the owners of the other businesses, with Rich from the planning department and Jamie and council members, and just encourage them to try to spiff up their businesses, paint, landscaping. Maybe there's some way we can help them out by saying we'll give them a couple of trees each, and they can do the rest, but some sort of partnership, because I really hate to see that it's a wonderful winery and brewery, and it's top dollar and high quality, and we want them to stay there, and we want the visitors to not say, ooh, this is kind of a crummy neighborhood. So if we can do that, I think that would be a really great project for the city, and tell them they can get free paint down at the landfill to paint their buildings with, and that it's time that we really like to work with them to improve that area. It would be a great project. Any other discussion on the budget? We have a motion and a second. Any questions by staff?
And just so that I'm clear, I think that the motion at this point is to come back with the resolutions at the next meeting, and then we'll get, with the exception of the community group presentation, which we're going to make here shortly.
Correct. That is the motion and the second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to say good night to Sam.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to get a drink of water.
Thanks, Sam.
Just the
Hello. Sure. I wasn't invited, but I just talked to Jamie about it. He said it's perfectly.
I know. How about 77% of the community works in the agriculture?
Let me come around there.
Yeah, you know what?
Okay, our next item, Lisa, are you going to make a presentation? on
Yeah,
this?
yes, I'll make a brief one.
Okay, thank you very much.
So good evening, Council. I'll give a brief presentation, and then maybe the Mayor and Council Chairman would like to talk a little bit more in detail about how the process, the decision-making process went. So as a way of background, the Council appointed Mayor Harlan and Councilmember Termini to a subcommittee to review all of the community-based health and human service providers' grant applications. And then come back to the council with a recommendation for funding. The budget was set at $250,000 in the proposed budget, and the group met earlier this week, and we went through the applications, and the subcommittee came up with their recommendation. And for in summary, the recommendation is that they determined to fund all of the groups except for the ones listed here at the same amount of level of funding. They also recommended not funding the new applicants this year, but encouraged them to reapply next year. And then the recommendation results in an overall increase to the budget from the $250,000 by $3,270 for a total new budget of $253,270. And so the list you see here, the groups are CASA of Santa Cruz County, Conflict Resolution Center, Hospice of Santa Cruz County, Save Our Shores, and the Volunteer Center. And you can see what the previous year's contract amount and the recommended change and the recommended new amount with the justification on the side. And I can continue on with the recommendation, but Mayor Harlan, since you were on the subcommittee, if you folks wanted to discuss it and go over how we went through the process.
Sure, that would be fine.
I'm done.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
It was that brief. So that's basically the recommendation from you guys, was the increase of by $3,200 for over the budget. And I think what we're looking for is the direction from the rest of the council to determine whether you want to accept their recommendation or not. And the funding, the $3,200 in funding, actually is on the next slide. I don't have control. Oh, thank you. The potential funding source is to reduce the transfer of the equipment acquisition and replacement fund. You can get the funding there. And you can see where it says reduce special transfers from $52,000 to $48,730, which maintains the regular equipment fund transfers that we already had programmed in there. And you can see on the bottom there we have the brief discussion of the funding for the chamber, which I'm not going to discuss right now. So with that is the conclusion of the recommendation by the subcommittee, and I think now in terms of, Mayor Harlan, if your group, the council, would like to determine and discuss the recommendation in more detail.
Are there questions or discussion by council members? Any questions about?
I have a question about Community Action Board. I'd forgotten that our housing fund, that they do things for our housing program. Why don't we take them out of this program and make it all part of our housing program?
Councilmember Termini, let's see if I can pull up the funding that we have programmed in for Community Action Board. Recall that we don't have any housing programs at this point included in the budget. That was, the mayor asked about that earlier, and we will return in July or the meeting in August to talk about how we would program those funds. Historically, it's been a contract for service with CAB. They've administered the emergency housing program and then the security deposit program. And the contribution in this venue was simply a donation without a contract for service.
Well, but I know that it's all intertwined, and what I'm trying to get to at some point in the far future is really showing what many of these organizations do for us directly. And I think that gray area where we have many organizations here that actually perform services for the city every day. And yet this list is always looked upon as charity. And the CAB is another one of those organizations that do things for us with our housing programs, even though we don't have technically a housing program now. Just something to think about. Just a note.
I think the year that we did that CECL, Central Coast Center for Independent Living, did training for employees. well, I think maybe that was many years ago. We paid for that. They had everybody go down to the village in a wheelchair.
I remember
Everybody
that.
put on blinders.
Yes, we did.
Some sort of blindfold, and try walking around and getting around, and a real hands-on experience of that. And I think we may.
I remember doing that.
I think we may have, or it may have paid for that, or said that's part of your grants that that we're giving you this year.
And we did. We had all the department heads pair up, and we had to put blindfolds on, and and walk through the village and 41st Avenue.
We might want to do that again. We have so many new employees. Yeah. Yeah.
Remember that?
Are there any questions from the council members? I'll open it up to the public in a minute. But any questions about these? Okay, this is a public hearing. Please come and speak to us about this issue if you like. Thank you for being here. Good evening.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, and staff. Thanks for having this. So we have just 3 minutes to share a little bit?
No, you can speak a little longer.
All righty. Great. Well, we'll try to be respectful with your time. So I wanted to, again, I think because Councilmember Bodatov, am I pronouncing that right? When I was here last time, I just mentioned that I'm here with my Diversity Center Board hat on, because I know you know me in a few roles in the community. So just to be clear. So want to thank you very much for the funding levels that you have. I know you and staff have worked on some recommendations, and we were disappointed to learn that you're not funding any new programs, or at least that's the recommendation, and we wanted to talk to you about looking at that again, with the Diversity Center specifically in mind. It would be totally appropriate for us to offer you a training as well, like you had just commented. We certainly can do that. We're very good at it. We've been doing it for 20 years now. 22, actually. So I would like to offer that regardless. But we wanted to talk to you about reducing we came to you with a proposal for 2 of our programs, and certainly just funding the one that you feel makes the most sense for the city of Capitola. There are a lot of seniors here. There are a lot of seniors that are served by us that live here in your community. Equally, there are a lot of families who live here, and they might have a parent somewhere else in the county or in the state, but our ability to do the work here with seniors all throughout Santa Cruz County will affect people who someone in their family identifies as LGBT in their growing years. And the trainings that we do, Jane's going to talk about that a little bit more, but the trainings that we do that your funds would help us with really are going to impact people in your community, even if you can't see or identify them right now as an LGBT senior that is living in Capitola. So I wanted to share that, and no amount that you would consider would be too small for us. So I just want to say, if in any part of this discussion you want to relook at, you made an offer to new programs to apply for the first time, and we took you up on that, and we would love to develop that relationship with you this year. I appreciate that you're inviting us to come back and ask again next year, which I imagine that we will, but hopefully it will be that there's some allocation made this year. I think it's a really good relationship to start. I could talk for a long time, but I want to give Jane some opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. And I wanted to really talk to Councilmember Norton, his comment last week about why was this the time we were coming to government funding. And I had said last week because so many of our marginalized seniors do not have the opportunity because of perceived discrimination to go into social services and to utilize the programs that you already do fund. So research reveals that LGBT elders are the most underserved population of all seniors due to a collective history of prejudice and abuse. Senior social service agency management and staff are perceived as unwelcoming, lacking compassion and understanding of their needs and histories. LGBT elders do not feel welcomed at senior centers and congregate meal sites. They don't reach out to programs like Meals on Wheels, in support home services, and transportation services for fear of discovery if and when workers enter their homes to pick them up or to come into their home to deliver. That's why one of the main reasons reasons that I got into teaching or doing the trainings on LGBT cultural sensitivity. And one of the things that I do in that sensitivity training is a brief history. So I wanted to share that and give you a mini cultural sensitivity training tonight. When I think about our 70 and 80 and 90-year-old seniors, you think about being born in the 1920s and 30s. And one of the things that happens is there was no language back then. They didn't understand what they were feeling. They didn't understand that they were different from anyone else, just that they were frightened and high anxiety and felt very much alone. So in the 1930s and 40s, families put their loved ones, their children, whether they were adults or under the age of 18, often into mental health institutions. And word spread quietly that these people were being castrated, shock treatment, lobotomized to cure them from being lesbian or gay. It created immediately the stigma and the fear that put so many of them into isolation. The psychological diagnosis was only reversed in 1973. In World War II, many Americans who lived in rural areas went into the war. It was then that they met others who were like them. It was then that they learned the terminology. And in a post-war era, they stayed in large cities, and that's where most of the gay ghettos are still today. You know, the Castro District, the Greenwich Village areas, areas of downtown Los Angeles. But in those areas, it was often the bar scenes where they could collect, or it was private homes where they always had to make sure that there were enough equal numbers of men and women so that if there was a police raid on a private home, that they could exchange partners and try to pass as a straight group of partiers. In 1953, Eisenhower signed into law making it illegal to be a federal employee. People could lose their jobs. Meanwhile, raids on bars and private residences went on, and many of the antisocial behaviors, if you were a woman dressed in a man's slacks, you could be picked up for antisocial behavior. If your bar or the residence were raided, your name, your address, where you worked, your family was notified in intimidating ways in the newspaper. People lost their homes, they lost their jobs. There was terrific abuse, verbal and physical violence. The police raid on Stonewall changed everything and started the beginning and marked the beginning of the gay liberation movement, where people stood up and said, no, we can't take this anymore. And then we have social bias and stigma continuing after the American Psychological Association declassified. The gay liberation movement followed the civil rights movement and the women's liberation movement. So those who were already in their 40s and 50s were often pulled out of the closet and revealed publicly. So there was a terrific amount of decision. Do I come out proudly as a gay man or woman now, or do I stay in the closet? And we believe that there's a large percentage of seniors who are very isolated and underserved. Universities started to open gay liberation or gay studies at the same time they were opening women's studies groups, and that's when the research started. So it's only been the last 10 years that there's really been some academic research on what the life of an LGBT senior is like today. What's happened now is that our seniors, the minute they start to have needs, the minute they become dependent and lose their independence, is when they recloset. They go back into the closet because of the fear of abuse and neglect. And they have heard the stories of LGBT seniors in skilled nursing facilities where aides won't bathe them, where aides won't feed them. There are suicides that occur in those situations on a regular basis. And those words get around, and that fear continues, and that anxiety continues. It is a life, it is a history of compiled experiences that leads to the seniors at a later time in life being completely isolated. If they've lost their friendship circles, if they've lost their partners, sometimes they are completely alone with no one to depend upon. So when you ask why we come for this kind of aid at this time, it really is because we're trying to meet a need that no one else else is meeting. We're trying to not recreate the wheels. The trainings are to go out into the community and train the workers and train the management staff and let the people in the senior centers know, the other senior citizens, that when someone walks in and they say, where's your wife, where's your husband, they have a nanosecond to decide if they're going to live their lie again, or do they remove themselves from all services and simply live isolated. So it is that training that brings up the compassion and the understanding that I believe not only our government workers, but our civil servants and our service providers really need to understand, so that the families, so that the brothers and sisters, so that the neighbors can come together in community and support everyone. I wanted to briefly mention some of the training programs that we've done. I've presented at the Human Service Department with the County of Santa Cruz at the Adult and Long-Term Care, the In-Support Services, the Veterans Services, Senior Roundtables, which is really a great outreach because anyone who works with seniors can attend a Senior Roundtable on a monthly basis, and we've done at least 3 or 4 trainings, including the Triangle Speakers Senior Panel. JFK University, a community mental health class where both teachers and several of the students are from this side of the hill. Family service agencies, their senior outreach peer support, which is all a volunteer group. They have 40 support workers, and they were trained 2 weeks ago. The East Cliff Village apartment complex, and that was not only for the staff, but also for the residents. UCSC at their community department. Advocacy Inc., the Ombudsman volunteers have been trained. Family Service Agency again. The Hospice Foundation, Area Agency on Aging. Clay mentioned that he had me come do a training for the Meals on Wheels volunteers, the in-home support and linkage staff. I've trained Christian Church Home Charities. It's the site managers. 60 of them came together here in Santa Cruz County from housing sites all over California. And Cabrillo College, an aging class where the students were considering the field of aging, going out to be home care workers and in other agencies. So that's just an example of the kind of outreach we're trying to do. We're really trying to go deep and wide and reach as many people as we can to create social change, to make all of our citizens safer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to? Oh, you want to finish?
I just want to wrap up super fast.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jane. The county came together in celebration, largely in celebration, a little bit of protest, at Santa Cruz Pride this past weekend. And I'm sure you all read in the paper. It was a phenomenal success, and I know a lot of people walk away from something so successful saying, why on earth do we need to continue to support outreach in a community that feels like the tides have turned? What Jane's talking about is the work we need to do now to ensure that this continues. The 60-plus program was there handing out flyers to people who'd never heard about us before. We need to continue to do that work. Your support will allow us to continue to do this. And I'm really grateful. I really appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. I'm Kathleen Johnson with Advocacy Inc., and I'm here mainly to say, first of all, thank you for your consideration once again for all of us. I thought I was.
You just got to get a little closer to it.
Maybe speak a little louder, too.
I'm so soft-spoken. But why I'm here right now is to follow through on the question that Jane and Adam were responding to. And that is to say that accessing the services that the city helps support means that it's a benefit to the city and less draining on city resources when things hit a crisis level. And when there's a population who is a part of a population that is the fastest growing, that is afraid to access those services and to utilize the services of the community organizations as well as coming to anybody in the city, it means that we're not maybe looking ahead to help prevent the higher cost services in the future. For those who do go to assisted living or skilled nursing, they've already, as Jane said, have now had their experiences throughout their life, which affects them when they walk into an entirely new environment, receiving entirely different kinds of services than they've had ever before, and from people who are complete strangers. To be able to have at least the knowledge that there is an attempt to ensure that everybody who's providing services in the cities that support that have an awareness of and a sensitivity is a first step to having that immediate independence lessened a bit, to be able to access when they need help instead of waiting until it's a crisis because of fear, that I think it all ties together as to why come to the city now, that it is an ongoing process that has great benefits for the future as well, and has a lot of benefits financially for the city to know that there's the potential of not having to make emergency runs, not having first responders that are the highest cost, not having fights that might occur because someone doesn't know. So I would urge the city to consider finding some money to at least start that process and that partnership, as they so nicely put it, in an attempt to be as inclusive of all of those aging people, regardless of what kind of person they are, that they have the support of a city that says we want you to be able to access services and we want you to feel comfortable doing that, because it will be cost effective to us in the long run. So I hope you'll consider the request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak? Good evening.
My name is Scott Winslow. I work for the Central Coast Center for Independent Living, and I want to thank you for acknowledging the training that you just mentioned. I wanted to remind you that we consider that part of our duty to the community, so I don't think we would have charged you for that training. And I also wanted to remind you that about 3 years ago we trained police officers here in Capitola from our New Options Traumatic Brain Injury Program in hopes of helping them identify someone who is intoxicated versus someone that has a traumatic brain injury. That's another training that we provided. So I just wanted to mention that and thank you for your support.
Thank you. We know we have some new officers, so maybe we'll be contacting you soon.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah.
You know, pick up the phone. We're probably due for a training.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Like you said, so.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak? Good evening.
My name is Laura Segura. I'm with Women's Crisis Support, Defensa de Mujeres, and also with the Human Care Alliance as well. I just want to extend our gratitude to the City of Capitola for the many years of support that you have provided not only to our agency but to the many agencies included in the Human Care Alliance. We have a 35-year history in Santa Cruz County providing domestic violence services, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So we have emergency shelter, we have counseling available, and we do a lot of work around prevention and trying to change the cycle of violence within families and specifically targeting teens right now. So again, I just wanted to say thank you for your ongoing support.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Hi, Shauna Mora, the Executive Director of the Conflict Resolution Center, and I too want to thank you for really stepping up and supporting so many of these different agencies. I know it's been really hard, and it's a really hard decision to make, and it's hard to look at all the different people that are coming in doing really, really good things, and I'm also grateful for the additional $314 that you're considering for the conflict resolution. Every single dollar makes a difference. Again, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And the city has used their services for some issues within our city employees. So that was news to me, and I'm very, very glad we did. Thank you very much.
Yes, we've done a number of things with the city. We're really glad that you consider us.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak? Good evening.
Good evening, council members. My name is Brooke Johnson. I'm with Second Harvest Food Bank, and I also just wanted to thank you for your support of social services and for our organization. And I brought you a thank you note for each of you from one of the children we serve through our Food for Children program. Thank you.
And you're having an event coming up. I just got a notice for.
Yeah, July 12th, we'll be having what we're calling Summerfest, which is I'm going to be an open house down at the food bank. So yeah, you're all definitely welcome to come. It'll be 11:30 to 2. It's a Friday.
Good. Thank you very much. Good evening.
David Bianchi at Family Service Agency, and I wasn't planning on speaking, but I also wanted to support the Diversity Center's request. You know, we're all very good at what we do, but even though we can train a suicide crisis line worker or a counselor or a senior peer counselor, we bring the Diversity Center in to educate our staff and volunteers on the population that they serve, and we also need to serve. So they're kind of a critical link in all this. It's great that, you know, we can do what we do and we do it well, but without them there's really a missing link there, and a good portion of the population would not be served as well if they weren't there to do these trainings. So I hope you'll support them, and why wait till next year? Thanks.
Thank you very much. And would anyone else like to speak? Then I will close the public hearing, and Michael.
Well, obviously I sat on the subcommittee and stand behind our recommendations, and yet two things move me to speak in favor of a small effort for the Diversity Center, and that is, number one, the only one of the new applicants that showed up, and not showed up once, but showed up twice. And also a story that our mayor told about, you know, the healthcare industry and the fact that the Diversity Center actually came in and did outreach training for medical professionals. So I think that, and I had to go through a process on this. That do they serve a very small segment, or do they serve our society as a whole? And I had to come up with they serve the society as a whole, because we are unable to educate ourselves in many fashions, and we need them, and they are a delicate link. So I think that a proposal for 1/10 of what they asked for, $1,000, to help them in the programs they provide in our community is not out of line. That's just my thought.
I would support that. Other discussion, Dennis?
Well, you know, you guys came back to us with this proposal and how the budget's balanced, and you recommended increases to 5 different groups here, and you recommended that none of the additional groups be funded. I think we should stay with that. I mean, we've already balanced this out. They can come back in futures. I doubt that the Diversity Center will not stop giving services that they give out there. They're going to give these services, and so I think that we haven't allowed many new services come in recent years because of our threshold that we have to deal with. And so I'm not in favor of adding any new groups at a time, whether it's their group or the other groups there.
We've done it though. We added Survivors Healing Center one year. We added Save Our Shores. We added O'Neill Sea Odyssey one year. We added over the years we have added small numbers, you know, small numbers of groups. But
we would be the first agency, I think, in Santa Cruz County to be funding this group. And is there
the city and the county? The county's considering if the city does.
The city does?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have before, and I think it's fine to do it. Ed.
I think that you guys did a great job preparing what you did, and I know we were shooting a goal of 215. We went a little over that. I think that anytime we have a chance to deal with discrimination, we should try to acknowledge that. And like I said, for a number of reasons, the fact that no one else is here, I do not have a problem. I think getting on this list, been watching these meetings for 3 years before I got elected, and to get on this list is very difficult. And there's usually, you know, everybody that's on this list wants a little bit more, and some of those people got it. I would agree with Councilman Termini and Mayor Harlan here that I think that this is probably a worthwhile group. And even though we're not in a position to give a lot, maybe it's just a foot in the door, and if you can be happy with that, then maybe we can live with it up here also. So I would support the list here, plus the inclusion of diversity for $1,000.
I will make that as a motion.
Where do we take the 1,000 from?
The city manager.
The same place we took the other overages from.
It looks like it's from the additional contribution to equipment.
I'll second the motion. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. All very much.
We should keep in mind that we started out with a $40,000 increase to our budget for community groups, and after the committee meeting, it became a $3,000 increase. So
That's a win-win.
that's a win.
Thank you all very much for all your wonderful work. Keep it up. Keep it up, and thank you for doing it. You're welcome. Okay. What else do we have? Do we have any other items, Mr. City Manager?
No, that wraps up our planned itinerary for this evening, and our expectation is that if our budget director can, on a consent calendar, coming to you soon will be the resolutions and the items necessary for budget adoption.
At some point, I'd like to look at the 5-year CIP, just to, because I know we used to get a separate booklet, and I was madly looking for that separate booklet, thinking that I had lost it. And then I thought, well, I don't think we had one this year, but
Thank you for mentioning. I meant to bring that up during my presentation. Now that we have this budget ironed out, I will be preparing the 5-year program, and I plan on bringing that to you in August.
just because when we're around town or in the grocery store, people will say, when is my street going to get done? And I can say in 3 years or probably in 4, or you're on the list, you know.
So I'm targeting August to bring that to you.
Okay, no rush, just whenever, so that we can try to remember a little of that as we meet people. That's their big issue, is they love the police and they want their streets fixed.
I just wanted to remind all the viewers and council that the car show is happening this weekend, and so there are going to be road closures down in the village. We put it on our Facebook page. We sent it out on our Nixle alert for those who are registered in Nixle. If you are not, 888-777. You'll get notifications early about road closures. We are going to send that out again tomorrow. So just to remind everybody, Saturday and Sunday is the car show, and so there will be road closures in the
Which roads
village.
are going to be closed?
The Esplanade and Stockton and Capitol Avenue.
Are they going to have cars up at the bank this year like they did last year? They had little Thunderbirds at the bank parking lot there, across kitty corner from Gales and Grady's Market.
I don't think so.
Now, it's not part of the car show proper,
Yeah.
but there are clubs that will come in and park if they can't get into the car
Oh,
show.
I thought it was overflow, maybe.
No.
Okay.
Those aren't designated spots unless they're there having breakfast or something. Not that I'm aware of.
No, it was like a T-Bird club, I think.
Yeah. And I think that all the big partiers always watch our meetings, so I'm sure they're listening out there. But if you're out in the village drinking tomorrow night and you leave your car, we're going to collect it.
Yeah.
We hate doing it, but it
I
happens.
think we only had a couple last year, didn't we?
Yeah, there's just a few, but there are signs. It's been posted past the 72-hour limit, and they will be towed first thing in the morning.
Did we give our standard little flyers to all the bartenders?
Yes, that went out as well.
They're the first responders to drunks, you know.
That did go out as well to the
Great,
businesses.
great.
And we're running the shuttle bus. It almost seems like we ought to run another shuttle. We're not.
The car show runs a shuttle for vendors and for exhibitors that relieves it, but yeah, the shuttle bus
Where
works
do they
well.
park?
Elsewhere. Half Cove.
I wonder if we almost ought to have one at Bank of America next year, like they do for the Begonia Fest, like they do for the Art and Wine Festival.
The mall or
Yeah.
eBay. Or
Well, next year we're going to have some extra parking as well. So
That's right.
Yeah,
hopefully
that's
that'll
right.
alleviate
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
That's
There's going to be plenty of parking.
Next year's show.
Oh, next
Right.
year's show, correct.
Right. What do you think of the idea of the city spending money for the canine officer?
You don't have to answer
I
that.
put 'em on the spot. I
You don't
love
have to
it.
answer that.
You don't have to. I'm just trying to help.
No, I understand. I think the entire support is great, and whatever the police department can do to help alleviate any budget concerns, we're in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
So was that spoken as a police chief or policy?
No, don't get
That's
him
my
started on
role.
that path, please. Please. I love him as our police chief. Leave it at that.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Thank you all very much, and
he's our
we
very
are
own-
adjourned.
He's our very own Leon Panetta is what he is.